The US is projecting to spend $5 trillion more than it brings in this year and even more next year. And many advocates think this could go way higher, should go way higher, and that we can just spend and spend and spend with no consequences. But in this video, I'm going to break down why that's not the case. And I'm going to explain what the real economic threat of all this government stimulus is. And of course, I'm going to explain what we can do to protect ourselves from this. So stay tuned. All right, welcome back to the channel. My name is Mark Moss, your host. I appreciate you stopping by. We like to talk about making money, investing money, having just overall success in life. So if you like those topics, click the like button, click the subscribe button, hit the bell notification so you're notified every time I put new videos out. Now, today we are talking about all this unlimited stimulus, all this money that's been created, all this money that's been printing, and what that really means. Now we have all this huge CV situation, this virus situation that's completely stopped the market, right? Basically the whole world ordered itself to shut down. Pretty crazy when you think about it. And in order to somewhat counteract that, in order to try to keep the economy going, the government, the central banks, and not just the United States, all the central banks around the world have gone into this massive monetary stimulus, this money printing, mostly in the United States because the United States Federal Reserve, with the dollar being the reserve currency. And so we've seen this massive monetary, all these fiscal responses. The Federal Reserve in the United States has at least 10 different asset purchase programs going on where they're buying bonds and they're buying, all these different things, treasuries, to try to prop up the market. 10 different assets purchase programs. These include purchases of corporate debt, treasury debt, municipal bonds, commercial paper, mortgages, you name it, right? And the Fed is spending so much money, it's basically up to about $5 trillion of new money. And this is on top of the $5 trillion it's already printed just to keep things afloat. And then we have the Congress spending. So they've authorized $2.2 trillion of new spending on top of already $1 trillion deficit for 2020. So deficit meaning they're spending more than they're bringing in. That's deficit debt, we would call it if you're a homeowner. So that's on top of the $1 trillion deficit they already have for 2020. They just authorized another $600 billion bill last week. And there's another $3 trillion bill being debated right now, more stimulus. So if you add all this up, I'll do the math for you. If you add all this up, it's over $6 trillion in deficit spending in debt in 1 year. And based off of how things are going, I'm sure it's going to be even more the next year. And the thing is the government thinks, the economists that are working with the government think that money is spending, right? If they can create more money, they can create more spending. And Congress and the Fed hope that by creating this money and injecting it into the system, it creates spending. They want the money to be moving over and over. And the reason why is because it's the spending that stokes the economy. We talked in the last video, I talked about the parable of the window, right? And so if you pay for one thing, then he can go pay for another, and they can go pay for another, and then go pay for another. So it keeps money moving. But if someone stops spending, then all those people downline lose out. Go back and watch that video. I'll link to it right here if you haven't seen it, so you can see what I'm talking about. But basically, they want spending because it stokes the economy. But the problem is that everyone is saving right now. And so of all the people that have already gotten stimulus, reports show that 38% of the people that received stimulus have just put it into savings. They didn't go spend it. And of course, we want the spending to stoke the economy, so they didn't spend it. 26% of people that got stimulus used it to pay off debt. And again, that's not moving it through the economy. So 38% used it for savings, 26% used it to pay off debt. And so all this stimulus isn't stimulating. It's not doing it. And so they're like, well, shoot, if a little bit didn't work, let's try more. Why not, right? And why wouldn't we when there's really no reason that we can't? And so when you talk about, or when you start to hear about all this endless money creation, all this money printing, you're starting to hear the words MMT being thrown around. That's modern monetary theory. And basically, it's not really new. It's been around for a long time. But you're really starting to hear this be talked about more and more and more because it's about unlimited money printing. And of course, all the MMT supporters say that there's no risk to doing this. Why not? And they point back to the 2008 Great Recession, and they show how the Fed basically printed trillions of dollars. At the beginning of that recession, the Fed balance sheet was about $800 billion. After QE 1, 2, and 3, that number went from $800 billion up to 4.5 trillion, and they say, hey, the world didn't end. As a matter of fact, it worked really well. As a matter of fact, we didn't really see much inflation. As a matter of fact, look at the stock market. It went on a huge bull run. We didn't have an economic crash. Like I said, inflation was hardly even there. And shoot, if 4.5 trillion didn't really work, it didn't cause any adverse affection, then why not double down? Why not go to 10 trillion? Why not go to 20 trillion? Heck, why not go to $100 trillion, right? That's what they seem to think, because debt and inflation didn't really seem to be a problem, at least what these MMT supporters say. And like I said, MMT is nothing new. It's only really been talked about the last couple years. I've actually shot a couple videos about it. I'm going to link to it right up here. So I did a couple videos about this quite a while ago. But like I said, it's just really starting to pick up steam because we're printing all this money. We're doing all this deficit spending. But MMT is like over 100 years old. It's been around for a long time. And really the difference of MMT is what we've been doing since 2008 is QE, quantitative easing. And so basically the government is giving money to Wall Street through bonds and things like that. So they're basically giving it directly to the banks, directly to Wall Street. And the reason why we didn't see a lot of inflation is that money never made it down onto Main Street. Main Street is to the people, to you and I. Well, MMT is like QE, except for instead of money for Wall Street, it's money for the Main Street. It's money for you and I. It's money for the poor. It's money for students. It's money for medical. It's money for everyday people like that. And so the basic idea is that the U.S. government could basically merge the balance sheet. So right now the U.S. government has the Treasury and it has the Fed. And basically they could kind of merge them, treat them as somewhat of a consolidated entity. And then the Treasury could just basically spend as much money as they wanted. It could spend money on anything that it wanted and as much as it wanted. And, basically the proponents of MMT say if the Treasury doesn't spend any money, then how are people supposed to earn any? As if the government's the only person to spend money. The problem is this: the government cannot give what it has not taken. All right. So the government doesn't produce. If the government's going to give out money, it's because they've taken money from somewhere else. They're not creating it. They're not creating value. They're not creating goods. They're not creating services. They're only redistributing them. All right. So when you talk about creating money with MMT, it ignores all these things. It ignores ideas like hard work, like actually creating goods, like actually providing services, like actually innovating, entrepreneurship, creating small business. It ignores all that. And basically it just looks to say that all wealth comes from the government spending, comes from the government creating, and comes from the government spending. And the more that the government spends, the richer we can get. The more they spend, the more money we get. And the more money we get, the more we can keep spreading around. But this is just a huge misunderstanding of money. And no one seems to know what it is anymore. MMT advocates say that money derives its value from the fact that you need it to pay your taxes. So you hear that all the time. Well, as long as the U.S. government makes it where you have to pay taxes in dollars, the dollar is always going to have value. Or people say that, the dollar is always going to have value because there's the U.S. military behind it, the largest military in the world. But neither of that's true. Money doesn't get its value because it has a military, or its value because it has to be paid in taxes. It's not any of that. Money gets value because of trust. Money has value because of trust. We all need to trust in the money. If we don't trust the money, then we're going to use something else, right? And if I can't trust it, there's no value there. Like, for example, I live at the beach here in Southern California. I could run down to the beach, grab a bunch of seashells, and I could bring those back to you and say, hey, here's seashells as my form of payment. And you'd say, no, I don't want that. That doesn't do me any good. I don't trust that as money. No one else is going to accept that from me as money. And so, no, I don't want that, right? So that's kind of how it is when you don't trust it. So when it comes to buy your goods and services, you need to know that someone else is going to accept your money. It's the trust in the system that creates the value. And so the trust in the system is very fragile and it can be lost. And we see it get lost all the time. We've seen it get lost in countries all over the place, from Weimar Republic, obviously, Zimbabwe, Mexico, Argentina, Venezuela, etc. So we see as soon as it gets lost, then the currency takes off. And once it's lost, it's pretty much impossible to regain, right? And that's why fiat currencies always fail in the long run. Now, Venezuela is a great example because we've been able to watch this happen in real time. It's had one of the worst cases of hyperinflation that we've seen, at least, like I said, in most recent history. And basically, you have the local paper, the fiat currency, became useless. And it became so useless that it was just laying on the streets. And yes, they still had a military. And yes, they could still enforce people to use their money, but nobody wanted it because nobody would accept it. And so the people were so worried about just surviving, right? They were so worried about feeding their family, getting food, getting water, that they would rather barter than use the government money. So, hey, I don't want that government money. I'll just trade you water for batteries. I'll just trade you whatever, right? And so that's what happens when confidence is lost. The military can say you need to use it, but if no one's going to accept it because they don't trust it, what good does it do, right? When trust is lost, it's over. And so what we see is that during times like that, like in Venezuela, as people are losing confidence in the money, people are just trying to get out of it as quickly as they can. And that's where MMT fails, because threats of violence, threats of jail, they can't create value. They can't create trust. And without that value, there's no money, right? Trust is always going to be required. Savings and store of value is going to go somewhere else that there's trust. So I don't trust my savings. I don't trust my value, my store of value, my wealth in this money because there's no trust there. So I'm going to put it somewhere else that I trust it better. I don't trust the dollar. I'll put it into gold. I'll put it into Bitcoin. I'll put it into real estate. I'll put it wherever there's trust. And where is the trust? So what can I trust if I can't trust the currency? Well, hard assets. Hard assets are at least something tangible. At least they can't be manipulated. They can't be created out of thin air, right? Real tangible assets that produce cash flow, like rental properties, like businesses, assets that go up in value with rising inflation, like home prices. Stocks obviously keep up with inflation for the most part. You get the idea. So hopefully that makes sense. We can't just print as much money as we want. Eventually it ends. The reason why is because money is not wealth. Money is not wealth. They're not creating wealth. They're creating money. Money is like a measuring stick. It measures how much wealth I have or measures how much wealth I can acquire, but it isn't wealth in itself. Does that make sense? Give me some thumbs up on this video if you like it. If you don't like the video, which if you like MMT, you probably won't, but that's okay. Give me a thumbs down. Either way, leave me a comment down below and let me know if you liked it. And if I got something wrong, let me know. I see too many comments that say, I'm all wrong, but they don't tell me why. So I'd always love to hear your argument on that. Other than that, that's what I got for you. To your success, I'm out.